In this lecture segment, we are moving from the British Isles to the continent, to mainland Europe, to talk about Carolingian art, the art of the 8th and 9th centuries. We will focus on a depiction of a Carolingian emperor and the palace chapel at Aachen. Charlemagne, meaning Charles the Great, is the leader of the kingdom of the Franks that you see here in this map in dark orange. When he becomes king after his grandfather and father, the territory he inherits is the bluish color here. So there's been some extension of that territory between 526 and the 700s. And to help remind you where we are, we have Britain and its Anglo-Saxon kingdoms up here, Muslim control in Spain, and a pope in Rome. Charlemagne extends the territory he inherits, and as you can see in this map, creates an empire out of much of Western Europe. The Carolingian period, named after Charlemagne, begins at the start of his reign and continues for a time after his death in 814. Charlemagne wanted to be the glue that Europe did not have at this moment since the fall of the Western Roman Empire, that administrative and bureaucratic glue that was a uniting force during the Roman period. He becomes the first unifying force in Europe since Constantine, and saw himself as a new Constantine, a legitimate heir of the heritage of the old Roman Empire. So he wants to bring back the Roman Empire, to unite the disparate tribal kingdoms that had been established under one political authority. But the type of empire he wants to bring back is specifically the Christian Roman Empire, and to do that in a legitimate way, he's going to need the Pope. The Pope is the head of the church in Rome, a church that had been pulling away from the control of the church based in Constantinople. He helps the Pope out of a tough spot, and the Pope crowned Charlemagne emperor of the Romans in 800 CE in Old St. Peter's. But it's really important to remember here that there is still a Roman Empire in place, the Byzantine Empire, and all of these Romano-Germanic tribes have acknowledged that emperor's, the emperor in Constantinople's, authority to a degree. So it's a bit problematic for Charlemagne to be an emperor of the Romans when there is an emperor of the Romans in the East. Charlemagne will use art and architecture to legitimize his rule, to underscore his right to rule, to associate himself with Christian Roman emperors from before, as he tries to express that he is the successor to Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor. Certainly being crowned emperor of the Romans in a structure commissioned by Constantine is a good start. He establishes a Christian Roman Empire in the West, which will exist off and on until the 19th century. We call this period the Carolingian Renaissance. A Renaissance is a rebirth, and Charlemagne is looking back to Constantine and Justinian, to the Christian Roman Empire, and he's going to use stuff, design, and iconography of the Christian Roman Empire to underscore his rule. In his imperial motto, Charlemagne had written the phrase Renovatio Imperii Romani, meaning the renewal of the Roman Empire, and that is his goal. His base of operations had been at Ravenna, a good location to refer to the power of the Roman Empire, but he moves it north to Aachen, a city in present-day Germany, and goes about a program of renovatio, meaning renewal or renovation or rebirth, as he tried to restore the greatness of the Christian Roman Empire. So let's look at some examples from the Carolingian Renaissance of how he does this. First up is this teeny little equestrian portrait. We are not sure exactly which Carolingian emperor this is, perhaps Charlemagne's grandson. It's about 9.5 inches tall and is made of bronze. It shows an emperor on a horse holding an orb or globe, which would be symbolic of world power. This is an example of renovatio that draws directly from a lost equestrian portrait of Justinian and one of the imperial monuments we looked at, the equestrian portrait of Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor, a sculpture which survived antiquity because Christians thought it was a depiction of Constantine. They have similar iconography, emperor showing power by controlling a horse, the same material, bronze, but their sizes are quite different. One tiny, one large. And the emperor has a mustache like a Frankish leader instead of the philosopher beard that Marcus Aurelius wears. So we are seeing the blending here of old imperial types with the context of the Carolingian period, as Carolingians use the vocabulary of Roman imperial art to underscore the power of the Carolingian emperor, in this case making him look like Constantine. In Aachen, having moved his capital there from Ravenna, Charlemagne goes about creating a center of power suitable for a Christian Roman Empire. One of the key elements of this program is the palace chapel, or the church hooked onto his palace that would have been his worship space and later became his tomb. The Pope headed up to Aachen to dedicate the church in 805 CE to both Christ and the Virgin Mary. At the palace chapel, Constantine links his rule to the Christian Roman Empire in very specific ways. The first is through location. It was built on the site of a Roman town that used the local hot springs to satisfy the Roman love of bathing. So in its heritage, Aachen and the location of the palace and church oozed Romanness. Its design was calculated to set the church within the context of Christian Roman structures. In this sketch, showing the original design for the palace complex, we see the church here, and in front of it is a forecourt, like what we saw at Old St. Peter's. It's a centrally planned church that especially alludes to San Vitale in Ravenna. Here you see the plans for San Vitale and the palace chapel. Both are central plans that create central domed areas with a gallery over the ambulatory and an apse with an altar. San Vitale is built on concentric octagons, one on the exterior and the other on the interior, that is obscured by the vaulting system used to support the dome, as niches called exedrae, and are placed between the piers to create an integrated flowing space. The palace chapel is also designed around an octagon, but instead of obscuring the octagonal shape on the interior, a viewer feels the octagonal shape with the space segmented into clear geometric forms. The palace chapel mimics San Vitale in creating an octagonal, centrally planned structure that has the soaring vertical that is a hallmark of the central plan, but creates a different sort of interior. And we see this as we look at the interior of both structures. We can see how each creates an elevating vertical space, but the palace chapel space reveals its octagonal structure. We see both churches have a second level, a gallery, which probably would have held female worshippers at San Vitale, but at the palace chapel it may have held Charlemagne's throne directly across from the altar. The throne may have also been placed right here underneath the dome, both locations expressive of Charlemagne's link to Christ. Both structures have similar richness in materials, marble revetment, and mosaics. Many of the artists in the Byzantine Empire who could not find work because of iconoclasm headed west and worked for Charlemagne, his predecessors, and his successors. So the material and visual language of the surviving decoration at the palace chapel is similar to what we see in Byzantium. We also see parallels to Islamic structures in Spain, like the Great Mosque at Cordova, with its polychromed arches, potentially borrowing again from the visual language of one religion to show the triumph or success of another. We also see physical borrowings at the palace chapel that were intended to legitimate Charlemagne and express that he was the successor of Constantine and that his empire was the true Christian Roman Empire. He received permission from the Pope to gather materials, columns, marble veneer, sculpture, and capitals from structures in Rome and Ravenna and bring them to Aachen to use at the palace chapel, another example of spolia. He imported porphyry columns from Ravenna as well, literally using the physical leftovers of the Christian Roman Empire of Constantine and Justinian to build his new Christian empire. He did not just import materials, he also brought in craftsmen from Italy to help construct the building. So like the Equestrian Portrait, we end up with a structure that speaks strongly of renovatio, renewal of the Roman Empire, but with local adaptations and developments. On the exterior of the structure, there is a vertical element added to the western side of the church, or the traditional side where the entrance is located, called the westwork. Originally, it had two round towers flanking the entrance to the church. In the westwork, we see the development of a distinct feature that will come to dominate church architecture in Western Europe. Charlemagne's contributions to the history of Western Europe are massive, and his efforts to use the art and architecture of the age of Justinian and Constantine to help his empire embody the renewal of the Roman Empire was a purposeful and effective statement of his empire as its successor.